know, right? They're the most confident.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee. We are really pleased to see you on this almost fall morning. I'm not quite ready to give up summer. But thank you for being here and for our inaugural meeting in this beautiful, beautiful room. So I want to acknowledge that we are here in the joint hearing room. And I'm Shelley Heddleman, Senator from District 11 in Baltimore County, and the new co-chair with Delegate Solomon of this joint committee. So welcome, and we're going to jump right in after my colleague says hello.
Good morning, everybody. Delegate Solomon. I actually am ready to give up summer, so happy fall soon. But I really just wanted to welcome Senator Heddleman, a longtime member of the committee, but newly here as the co-chair from the Senate. So really happy to have you. And obviously, Senator Lamb hasn't gone far, and is still a wonderful member of our committee. But just happy to be back and want to welcome the Office of Legislative Audits team. And Mr. Chief Auditor, we will turn it over to you and your team.
Good morning. For the record, Brian Townend, your legislative auditor. I'm proud to say I've made through my first year, and I'm incredibly happy to be here. I think it's incredibly appropriate that the first legislative audit presentation to the committee this year is in this room, and that we're hearing this audit report, because you're looking around at an absolutely beautiful building, and then we're talking about leases and as the primary and capital projects in this report. Before I start, and I'm going to keep my comments incredibly brief, I just wanted to introduce the team. With me on my right is Eddie Rubenstein. He's the director who was responsible for audit. On my left, Kathy Clark. She was the audit manager. In the audience, I have Mark Katz, who was the senior auditor, Thea Chimento, who worked on this audit, Karen Howes, who worked on the audit and who recently returned to OLA. We're glad to have her back. And two brand new employees that are going to be serving the legislature for many years to come. Malka Safran and Chris Miller. I would ask them both to stand and get embarrassed in front of the committee. And with that, I'll move on. Usually, in my opening comments, I would highlight some of the key things about the audit report. And we're here to talk about the Department of General Services, Office of the Secretary, and other units. I'm going to deviate this time. And I think I'll explain why in a minute. I'm not going to talk about our audit at all. None of my comments are going to be. I like to keep score, and if you look at our audit report, it's pretty big. There are 32 pages of OLA findings, including the objective and our auditor comment. There are 35 pages of agency response. And my team's going to talk about our 32 pages. I'm going to talk about the 35 the agency presented, because they are two completely different documents. 35 pages, and the facts presented in them do not contradict the factual accuracy of anything in the audit report. As our long history has proven, I stand by the factual accuracy of 100%, not 99, 100% of the facts presented in this audit report, based on the evidence that the department was able to provide my audit team during the numerous months that we were doing the audit. But I think the length of the response is very significant in this case. 35 pages filled with not factually accurate, not factually accurate, not factually accurate. What you don't see in that entire, and it's filled with lots of numbers talking about cost savings here and cost savings there. What you do not see is one single number contradicting the specifics that we talked about. For example, we said that they could not provide a cost-benefit analysis of buying the building versus leasing the building. I'll use the health department, $200 million for the first 15 years. They're not going to be moving out. This is a long-term project. If I was going to project, we're probably looking at a $1 billion endeavor, okay? They said our finding was factually inaccurate. I would expect that somewhere within that 35 pages, I would see something to say, you know what, we did a cost analysis, and I can tell you by moving into that building, we saved the state $250 million. Nothing. There is not one figure in there that contradicts those assertions. There's a lot of numbers there talking about cost savings had we renovated the $1 billion in the state office building, not subject to my audit report. I'm not here to dispute it because that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about we're about to commit not us, not the people in this committee, but my children and my grandchildren to a long-term lease. And I recently purchased a car. I considered leasing. I looked at how much a lease was going to cost. I looked at how much. It's a Toyota Corolla. Cost me about $25,000. I have more documentation to support my decision to buy my Toyota Corolla than my team was able to find during the course of their audit to support a $200 million lease for the health department. And that's frustrating. And so I'm optimistic because there was a lot of agreements in the report, but I do think that we're dealing with two different things, and without that, I'll turn it over to my team to walk through our findings.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Rubenstein. I'm one of the directors of compliance and performance audits at OLA. I'm going to quickly move through in the interest of time. Slide 2 gives an overview of our report, and slide 3 summarizes the key findings from our audit, which, as Brian says, primarily relates to DGS lease transactions and capital funds. Starting on slide 4.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rubenstein, can you talk more closely to the mic?
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Slide 4 provides some background on the state center relocation leases. In April 2021, the state announced that it would relocate 13 state agencies to Baltimore's Central Business District. As of July 2024, DGS had awarded 8 leases on behalf of 9 agencies, totaling $410 million. Our first finding on slide 5 focuses on the overall decision to relocate agencies to the Central Business District by awarding leases to private entities. We found that DGS could not document that it conducted a cost-benefit analysis considering the benefits of purchasing property instead of awarding leases, raising questions as to whether leasing was the most cost-beneficial alternative. As Brian said, for example, the 15-year cost of the MDH lease is $278 million for a building that the landlord purchased for $7 million in 2016. DGS also cannot document that it considered consolidating the leases in a single location or consolidating multiple agencies at the same location to maximize the state's purchasing power and to achieve operational efficiencies. With the exception of the Department of Human Services, I would note that all of these agencies were previously located at State Center. In addition, DGS did not determine the fair market rates for the leases, resulting in a lack of assurance that the leases were at or below market rates. We noted that the lease costs were not presented to BPW in a transparent manner. Specifically, DGS only reported the first-year cost instead of the full cost over the lease term. And this is significant because the leases all contained a 2 to 3% escalation in the lease rate each year. For example, DGS reported that the first-year cost of the DHS lease was $3.7 million, without disclosing that the annual rent would be $5.8 million by the end of the lease, and the total rent would be $49 million. DGS also did not present other costs associated with the lease, such as parking, which had an additional annual cost of $4.7 million for the 8 leases that had been awarded. The next 2 findings relate to the solicitation, evaluation, and award of 5 leases by DGS on behalf of the Health Department, Department of Human Services, Department of Assessments and Taxation, Department of Planning, and the Comptroller. Starting with finding 2 on slide 6, we found that DGS did not structure the lease solicitations in accordance with state procurement regulations and did not ensure that the solicitations addressed each of the agency's needs. We found that none of the 5 requests for proposal specified when the agencies needed to occupy the space or indicated that the proposals would be evaluated based on the proposed occupancy date. This was significant because DGS scored proposals for the MDH solicitation with later occupancy dates lower, even though this criteria was not listed as an evaluation factor in the solicitation. We also noted that critical requirements were omitted from 3 of the 5 leases, resulting in significant change orders processed after the lease had been awarded. For example, one change order increased MDH's annual rent by $434,000 to add 16,000 square feet of storage space. DGS also could not document how factors such as the anticipated use of telework and public transit by agency employees were factored into the decision for how much parking to procure. Parking for the 5 leases that we looked at in detail will cost $22 million over the full lease terms. Next, finding 3 on slide 7, we found that DGS did not properly evaluate the lease proposals. For example, DGS rejected 4 proposals received for the SDAT solicitation because they combined financial and technical information, but accepted 3 other proposals that did the same thing. DGS cannot readily explain why it accepted these 3 proposals, which included the proposal that was ultimately selected for the award. We found that DGS did not obtain detailed descriptions of construction work to be performed and the associated cost to enable an assessment of whether the estimated costs were reasonable. The estimated construction costs for the 5 leases at the time they were awarded totaled $120 million. The leases were structured to include these costs in the lease rates the state pays, meaning that even if there are potential cost savings, they won't be realized in what the state is paying. Moving on to finding 4 on slide 8, which relates to a lease renewal for the Maryland Department of Environment. This lease was renewed in January 2024 for 20 years at a cost of $167 million and was to include $10 million in renovations to MDE's office space by the landlord. We found that DGS cannot support numerous aspects of this lease, including why the base rent increased by 8.2% from the prior lease, and why the lease term and annual escalation percentage significantly exceeded other leases that we looked at. We noted that the state will pay an additional $12.6 million over the 20-year term compared to the prior lease. I do want to quickly address a disagreement from DGS on this point. In their response to the report, DGS asserts that they're actually saving $3.5 million compared to the prior lease because the escalation rate in the prior lease was 4% and was decreased to 3.45% in the current lease. I haven't seen the detail of how they calculated the cost savings, but it appears that the math is ignoring, like I said, the base rent was increased by 8%. We also noted that of the $10 million renovation budget, $8 million of it consisted primarily of cubicle enhancements. DGS could not document that this work was necessary and that the costs were reasonable, or that it considered separately procuring the services. DGS also did not accurately present the cost to BPW. Specifically, DGS indicated that the $10 million would be used to renovate MDE's office space, convert the building to electric infrastructure, and install solar panels. However, almost all the costs were unrelated to energy savings. As I said, they were for cubicle enhancements. And we noted that the cost of installing solar panels was actually included in the rent. DGS also could not adequately justify the decision to waive the termination for convenience clause from the lease. While DGS advised that it waived the provision to help the landlord secure financing for the renovations, the only support we were provided was a letter from the landlord's bank respectfully requesting the clause be removed. Given that the state is ultimately paying the cost of the renovations through the rental payments, we question whether removing the provision from a 20-year lease is in the state's best interest. Finding 5 on slide 9 is that DGS did not publish lease awards on eMaryland Marketplace, or EMMA, as required by state regulations. We found that 172 of the 183 leases awarded between July 21 and July 24 had not been published on EMMA as of September 2024. I'll now turn it over to Kathy to discuss the remaining findings in the report.
Findings 6 through 9 relate to capital funds. On finding 6, slide 10, we found that DGS did not obtain required procurement documentation from grantees and did not have a comprehensive policy for conducting site visits of those related projects. The Maryland Capital Grants Project Manual encourages grantees to use competition to select vendors working under these grants and requires them to provide DGS with documentation showing the basis for that selection. Our testing found that this documentation was not obtained. As a result, DGS could not determine if funds were being properly used. In addition, DGS's site visit policy did not address how frequently visits were to be conducted, and DGS could not explain how it selected the 61 site visits performed between October 2022 and April 2024. Site visits are critical to ensure that the projects are progressing in accordance with the contracts funded by the state capital grants. Finding 7 on slide 11. We found that DGS did not have procedures to identify unused capital funds and report them to the Board of Public Works for deauthorization. State law requires that the capital funds must be encumbered within 2 years or fully expended or encumbered within 7 years after the funds have been awarded, unless an extension is granted by the BPW. Our analysis identified that capital grants and projects totaling $194.2 million met the criteria for that deauthorization, but had not been reported to the Board of Public Works for an extension or deauthorization as of June 2023. Deauthorized capital funds could be used by the state for other purposes, such as to fund other capital projects without issuing additional debt or servicing debt for state bonds. Finding 8 on slide 10, DGS did not adequately account for funds in a non-budgeted clearing account. It's used for capital construction projects. As of June 30, 2024, DGS could not determine the proper disposition of $8.4 million related to activity during fiscal years 2000 through 2023. Finding 9 is on slide 13 and relates to DGS's procurement of a construction management services for the State House Rehabilitation Project. DGS could not justify why it did not seek competition when hiring for those services. Although DGS procurements for rehabilitation on historic structures are exempt from state procurement law, DGS had not established the required written policy governing its exempt procurements at the time that the contract was awarded. DGS also did not disclose the anticipated total cost of the project, which was $37.1 million, when it presented the initial $1.5 million contract to the Board of Public Works. Senior Board of Public Works officials advised us that the total anticipated cost should have been disclosed to the board when the initial contract was procured. Further, we found that DGS could not support the basis for the 11 contract modifications processed through July 2024, which totaled another $33.5 million for that project. Slide 14 is finding 10. DGS did not adequately pursue delinquent accounts receivable from other state agencies. Specifically, dunning notices were either not sent or were not sent timely, and DGS did not escalate those outstanding accounts to the senior leadership of the respective agencies. We also found that DGS did not have controls to ensure adjustments to the accounts receivable records were proper and authorized. Our last finding is on slide 15. DGS did not perform inventory compliance audits to ensure state agencies were in compliance with the state property and equipment requirements. Per state law, DGS is responsible for state property and equipment for most state agencies and units. We found DGS had not performed inventory compliance audits as required by its policy since September 2019. Audits performed prior to September 2019 did identify deficiencies which required corrective actions, such as having unrecorded capital equipment. Other of OLA's audits have identified deficiencies with state agencies not performing physical inventories. Our conclusions are on page 16. Thank you again for your time, and we're happy to take any questions.
Sorry, before we turn over to questions,
Mr. Tanner.
Sorry. Before we turn over to questions, I just wanted to add one point. DGS is a control agency, and a lot of the findings that you're seeing in this report go beyond just DGS. It's their role in ensuring other state agencies are meeting requirements. So when you see the agency responsible for eMaryland Marketplace not posting things on eMaryland Marketplace, it sends a message across the state to those state agencies that they're supposed to be providing oversight to. And the same thing with all these leases. They are the control agency for all these other agencies, and I think it highlights the significance of the findings in this report. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions you may have.
Can I just make one request? We are still having some sound issues. If people can really be attentive to speaking in the mic, and if we can turn up the sound a bit, that would be, I know many of our members would appreciate that. Thank you.
I think the first witness that we see is Delegate Moon. I'm sorry, the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your summary, as always. I just want to center in on your, it sounds like, I mean, several of these findings are really related to the state center relocation, and the lease process is a separate set of questions that continues into other issues, but I want to center on the state center bit for a second. And so, you know, I guess the comp that you were looking for that you didn't get was leasing a building versus buying a building. Can you just give us a ballpark comp for what a ballpark might be for buying a building in question in the leases?
Thank you. That is an incredible question, and I'm embarrassed because I think one of my jobs as a legislative auditor after completing this audit would be to come to you and give you an answer to that. I can't. I'm not in real estate. We turn to the department whose job it is to go and do this to give us that information. I don't have any information to give you on that cost because we weren't able to get it during the audit.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up on that. Is there a historical norm in Maryland, at least, for how we've treated this question? Do we typically buy buildings instead of doing these long-term, big-money leases?
I'm going to say Thornton, COVID, and this is going to be the third one. This is, again, I've been in this position 30 years. This is a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-my-career experience where we're moving state agencies that historically have been in state-owned buildings, and it's a complete change. We've had some. MD is one example that has been, I think, in the current location since 2002. For the most part, though, state agencies have been in state-owned buildings. So this is a significant change in the approach that the state is taking and handling state agencies. And I think that's why to look at it as just the state relocation is really not presenting the entirety of the problem, because this is the new norm. And the same practices and methodologies that went into this decision, I fear 10 years, we're going to be here talking about that before we know it. And the time to go and address these things to make sure it doesn't happen when the renewals for all these leases come up is today.
Sorry, one final question. I just note that your audit period is September 1, 2020 to July 15, 2024. And just for the public benefit there was obviously a change in administration going on there. So as to this central question about moving from purchasing buildings to moving to leasing them, at least as to the state center project, was that decision made in the Hogan administration?
I'm going to ask that you address that question to DGS when they come. The response does not indicate that, or at least for most of the response, they're not saying this was a prior administration and we just came into office. That's not the tone of the current response. So,
got it. But I'm just trying to understand factually, if that was the seismic shift, was a change from purchasing to leasing, did those state center leases begin in the Hogan administration?
Abby?
I think the question is still better for the department to answer, but just to provide a little bit of context, it was April of 2021 when the decision was made to move out of state center. However, I don't think we couldn't find anything that specifically said go about it by leasing property. So
when's the date of the first lease we saw?
I believe it was shortly thereafter in April 21, but
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me.
All right, thank you.
Senator Lamb? Senator Lamb is in Senator Hester's seat.
Oh. Well,
It's mixed up on the screen then. Can you?
you want me to move over to?
No, it's fine. It's fine. But it's on our screen as Senator Hester, so the microphone.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tannen and the audit team for this report. I guess, a lot here in this report, obviously, and you just kind of touched on the highlights of it. But I imagine what the department will come up and say is that, you know, they've done this analysis, they've looked at this, they have, you know, believed that this will save money in the long run. You know, to follow up on Delegate Moon's line of questioning, you know, I think it was, my understanding was that under the prior administration, there was more of an intent to kind of buy and purchase. And then, you know, with the new administration coming in, there was a change in direction to lease. And, you know, I think the case that's going to be made is likely that, you know, there was longer term cost savings and all of this, that, you know, that's why we went in that direction. What's your response to that?
I should have one. I really do. And I'm going to apologize. Same as Delegate Moon's question. You come to me as your legislative auditor after I finished an audit of this agency and have these findings in the report, and then you read the agency's response. I should be able to give you an answer with confidence and at least tell you whether, you know, was this a good deal or not. I can't. You've all read our reports. We are very, very careful that if there is something, we'll use terms like not sufficiently, inadequate. You don't see those terms in the findings in this report. We're talking about, you know, nothing. And that's what we're talking about. When we're asking, can you show me? And their response says, we did these cost analysis. We considered co-moving in and we determined, and it's pretty aggressive. We determined it wasn't feasible, it wouldn't have been cost effective, there would have been no cost savings. It reads incredibly well. Unfortunately, we have no support, zero. And the response doesn't have any specifics. Give me one, for example, as a result of all those cost studies. None of it's in the response in 35 pages. And so I can't answer the question because I don't have any of the data that they use to reach those conclusions.
So your point is that you couldn't find any documentation that backed up a lot of the rationale that was being presented to you. And I think some of this, it looks like, was even presented in the report itself, where, you know, I think in the report, it points out that the MDH lease, for example, for the Department of Health will cost the state over $275 million over 15 years. Whereas if the state would have bought that building, I think your report says it was bought for $7 million, right? So $7 million compared to a $277 million lease. You know, even with the Social Security building, you know, I think, which was purchased too by an independent, you know, company, you know, we're going to be leasing that back for a lot more. You're trying to lease that a lot more, right? So
$275 million is the scratch of the surface. And that's why I'm cautioning you. That's the first term of the first lease with the incentive for us to move in there. What's going to happen in 15 years when we're all moved in? You know, it costs a lot of money to move an agency the size of the health department to another location, and it takes a lot of time. So what's our negotiations going to be in 15 years when it's time to renew that lease? And I'm anticipating they don't expect to do this every 15 years, and the goal would be to stay there long term. And so when you see a dollar amount like $275 million, you've got to multiply it at least by double, at least, if not more, because odds are they may stay longer than, you know, 15, 30 years. I don't know. But there's going to be an escalation clause, as you see in all the leases. So that dollar amount is just for the initial term. And I think that's very significant.
So it seems like the common theme amongst a lot of the findings here is that you just couldn't find documentation for almost any of it, right?
That is a pervasive theme, but I don't want it to be just about the documentation, because there are concrete facts in here of not doing things in accordance with their own procedures or in accordance with state laws and regulations that can't be discounted. They are all supported by facts in our work papers. What I can't support is what's in the second half of the report, the 35 pages of the response.
Got it. Okay. So I guess, you know, a question on some of those facts and a lot of documentation from your perspective that's absent, that, you know, there seems to be a lot of just take us for our word. We did the cost-benefit analysis. We believe this is better. But when you asked for the documentation, you couldn't find anything.
We could not find anything. And today, in their response, they did not provide any examples of what those cost benefits would be in the 35 pages.
Can I interrupt one along this line of questioning, because we did receive something that is a 3-page document that says summary of MDH assumptions for 15-year period. Is this something that you saw in the course of your audit?
If we had seen that, perfect example. If
just-
we had seen a document with no support behind, as how many pages? Okay, so for the magnitude of purchasing a $250 million lease moving the health department, I think we would have needed a hearing room of this size to to discuss the documentation. That should have been there. It's not a simple thing. They're the real estate experts. But a lot of analysis, trends and different things like that.
But this document of option 1, option 2, option 3, was
we
that
would have-
shared with you
If
at
we
the
would
time
have
of the audit?
received that document, we would have said we received a 4-page analysis. However, they could not support the amounts in there. That's
This
not
is the
what
first time you're seeing that document. Okay, thank you.
And also, to add to the record, the committee received this at 9 p.m. last night, and it was shared with you all this morning, so members of the committee, you should have it, but we had requested that prior, and I think it's telling that you all didn't receive something like this during your audit. Delegate Harrison, I think you were up next.
Thank you. Thank you. You, on page 13, finding 9, you indicated, I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Brian Tennant, are you referencing the slide or the audit report? I'm sorry.
Slide 13, finding 9. That historic buildings are exempt from procurement policy. Or procurement. Can you explain what you said once again? Because it caught me a little bit. You said that they're exempt, but they didn't get the proper documentation.
So, under state procurement regulations, generally things need to be competitively procured, but there are numerous exemptions in there where the regulations don't have to be followed. This would be one of them, as DGS specifically is noted in state law as not requiring, they're exempt from procurement regulations for the rehabilitation of any historic structure.
They didn't seek. They couldn't justify why they didn't seek competition, but yet they're exempt. So I'm not understanding.
So they, at the time, another part of that law is that although there are agencies that are exempt, the law also requires them to have policies and procedures that explain how they're going to go about doing a procurement. Because the intent of granting the agencies exemptions is not to just completely do away with the principles of procurement, including competition. So at the time they awarded that initial contract, they had no such policies. I believe they did finally implement them towards the tail end of 2024. But I think basically what happened was they directly solicited that vendor instead of, it's construction management services. You would find at least one other vendor in this area with some ability to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Arentz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you. I guess, is your assumption that DGS is the procurement arm for these types of buildings? That's your assumption in your audit, that that's what they should do, and they should review all opportunities. Is that correct?
That is their role. These procurements are supposed to be handled by the department.
Okay. I do real estate in part of my life, and I've read through the audit, and I guess I got really cloudy on some of this stuff, because if I would do my job as an agent, and I do some commercial, but I do mostly homes, but I looked through this and I think that all these options that I read through here, and I started looking at where they went with parking, where they did this, where they did that, we have to provide our customers with the options, whether you will lease or whether you will purchase. And in those options, in my world, I have to provide them with why I believe what I believe to be true. So I would typically present you with an analysis on purchasing. It may look egregious if the purchase price is $100 million versus a lease price of 10 grand a month. But I have to do that. And you're saying in these audits, none of that was provided to you.
That's correct.
Okay. Is it their policy that's causing the problem, or is this new to us? All of a sudden this happened in the last 4 years, 5 years?
They have numerous.
Can you get to the mic? I
sorry.
can't really hear you.
They have, numerous leases that they're responsible for. This is the first time they had, done something of this magnitude, I think, of trying to move multiple state agencies into a new lease, within a constrained period.
Nothing was provided you to tell you what the alternative was. It's just saying, this is what I saved you, therefore I'm right?
Correct.
Okay. There's something I think was really kind of comical. It's finding number 7. It said DGS did not have a procedure to identify and refer unused capital funds to the BP Board of Public Works for deauthorization or extension. As of June 23rd, capital funds totaling $194.2 million met the criteria for deauthorization. Is that brand new to us? Is that something we just started doing? Or did we have an epiphany that we needed to track those funds? And has that been being done?
I don't believe I don't know specifically when the law was implemented, but I don't believe it's new. It's a new finding, but.
Okay. I just find it odd that, we're looking for, this is taxpayer dollars we're spending again. And when like I said, in my world, I have to provide you with options. You are my customer. I am their customer. You and I are taxpayers. And if I can't get those things, it doesn't seem like you're doing your job. In my world, I would not be in business. I would not be able to perform this function. And I don't know whether, and I've said this before, I don't know whether that starts at the top or where it starts, but at some point we have to address those things, where this mindset comes from. And I appreciate that we change secretaries every 4 to whatever number of years, but there's something in here that's fundamentally wrong when we're just now discovering that we have $194 million and we don't know what to do with it. And where are the other $194 million in the past? That was my question. Wouldn't you agree?
Thank you, Delegate Ahrens. I think I see Delegate Smith, and just for our staff, I think we've got our seats flipped. There we go. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to all of you. Sorry for my tardiness. I just had 2 clarifying questions. So under finding 7, at the last point, it discusses that there were 33 grants and projects with unencumbered balances totaling $12.3 million were at least 7 years old. Do we have an understanding of those grants beyond 7 years old? Like, do we know how many are 10, 15? Like, how far does this go?
I don't have that in front of me. I'm sorry. We could get back to you.
Yeah, that would be really helpful to get a sense of kind of the scope of when some of the lack of oversight was initiated, because 7, obviously, maybe it's 15, I don't know. So I appreciate that clarification. And then under finding 9, wanted to go back to the question posed by my colleague about, so this type of structure is exempt from state procurement law. However, agencies must have in place a policy to satisfy the fact that they're exempt for these particular properties. I guess I want to understand, we're always hearing these agencies one by one, but should every agency does every agency have this policy on file? I guess if the exemption is blanket for certain structures, does every agency have this on file?
I can't remember which hearing it was, but it was one of the last 2 hearings. I talked about this very topic and the meaning of the word exempt. Exempt means, and I have this all the time with my children, do I have to do this? No, you don't have to, but you should. And that is, when it says you're exempt from doing competitive procurement, means you don't have to, but if you're not going to do it, there should be a really good reason why not, because greater minds than myself came up with the procurement regulations. And so these agencies and the law thought about that, and they said, you're going to be exempt because the nature of dealing with historic buildings often will result in the need to go and deviate from this, buying a computer. And so they get the exemption. What this finding is saying, great that you have the exemption, now justify the method that you use to get those services. And if they had a write-up explaining, we use this, the cost benefit and all that, it would be reflected in here. So
I believe there's a gray area in the law, because I hear what you're saying, but I'm a lawyer. Like, what do you actually have to do?
The law filled
What you
the
should do
gap.
sometimes has to be memorialized.
The law filled the gap.
Okay.
And said that for exempt agencies, they need to develop their own procedures.
But it's kind of
considered this.
vague, right? I guess you're saying that it could be a write-up. I guess I'm trying to understand how robust this needs to look. Is there a template? I guess to me, you could arrive in this problem in another agency if there's not like an express way a policy should be set up so that you can feel that there's been a satisfactory,
I can say that there is There's no more detail than that. And we
Okay.
do encounter this very same situation with exempt agencies, and
So perhaps there would be,
I think there's going to be an opportunity in a report we're going to be issuing in the near future to
Okay.
provide some more broader statewide perspective on the topic of exemptions.
okay, great. I always feel like we should make it as easy as possible for people to comply and do the right thing. So anything that you can do to help with that is greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time, sir.
I have a question that Senator Hester submitted. She was unable to join us this morning, but she sent an email and asked, with regard to finding 6, that you recommend that DGS work in conjunction with the BPW to obtain authority to require grantees to conduct competitive solicitations. One, I'm going to add in my question. Do you think that it should be across the board regardless of what size the grant is, 1? And 2, can you point to a place in COMAR or in statute where there's a requirement for competitive solicitations?
I'll turn it over to Eddie.
So on the first question, I think possibly there is some room to, depending on, establish some thresholds depending on how large or small the grant is. I'm not aware of any specific COMAR or law requirement, but we could look into that and get back to you.
I think we have, and if the state grants audit that we issued, that's referenced in the report, had a number of conditions, and I think it was just the subject of some recent, I think it was just in the news recently, about the status of the implementation of those being extended. So I think there are some areas to enhance the overall oversight of those state grants.
All right, we can follow up on that. Thank you. Senator Brooks?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Quick question on finding 1, the last one on there. You said DJS only reported the first year cost of leases to BPW of the full cost, as opposed to the full cost over 10 to 15 years. Now, were there any footnotes or anything? Because that would be a market difference. You're talking about reporting 1/10 or 1/15 of a lease. Seems that should just jump out at them or jump out at somebody as something that should be easily questioned.
There's no footnote, but I would agree.
Okay. Another question I've got, you're talking about there's one controversy about the 20-year lease, and I guess that was the Montgomery Park Business Center? Yeah, and that there was like a $10 million, I guess you call it leasehold improvements. Now, is that uncommon? Because I would think that when you're leasing something, and if there were improvements that are needed, that's sort of part and parcel.
There we go. Excellent question. And I think, yes, often there are leasehold improvements. I think what's unique in this circumstance is twofold, and more importantly, the response that we received to that very item. In the response, they said they did not have the funds in their budget. As Eddie pointed out in his presentation, about $8 million of the $10 million in renovations dealt with cubicle upgrades and renewals. And so every agency has cubicles, and every agency can, I'm not questioning whether or not they were old. They're back from 2002, I think they said was the last time. And if you need to replace them, there is a mechanism already in state procurement regulations to how about going and doing that. Reach out to a bunch of cubicle agencies and get a price. But as noted in their response, they didn't have the funds for that. And so they went through their landlord to get those cubicles. The landlord's not a cubicle manufacturer. He's a landlord. He, in turn, is going to go to a cubicle manufacturer to get those cubicle enhancements done. And I'm not saying that that's not the most cost-efficient way of doing it, and there may be a benefit of amortizing those costs over the term of a lease. But before we get there, perhaps we should do some due diligence and see how much would it be if we contacted the cubicle companies to find out what a reasonable cost would be before we go and decide to add $10 million in upgrades into our lease, which are going to be amortized over the course of the lease. That's what we were looking for. More importantly, if there's an issue with funding, if this is going to be a new approach, there's no funds in the budget, and we're going to fold it into leases, given the fact that all state agencies, or most of the significant state agencies, are now functioning under a lease, then we're going to have a new process in place when the next leases come out to be much more detailed in scrutinizing those adjustments to see whether or not things that should have been subject to a normal procurement process are not being folded into the leases.
I just had two quick questions before we wrap up. Back to finding 6, I appreciated Senator Hester and the co-chair's questions. You wrote that there are 4 capital grants totaling $12 million that were what you looked at. Can you talk a little bit more about what those capital grants are? Are those, low dollar LBIs? Are they like separate capital grants that would be in the budget? What kind of organizations those would go to?
I think we'll have to get back to him on that, because I don't know.
I'm going to have to get back to the detail. I don't have that right in front of me, but we could definitely get you that detail.
Because I think that goes to the point that Senator Hester was trying to raise. I mean, obviously, a $50,000 LBI to a small nonprofit is very different than, a multi-million-dollar grant to a much larger organization that may have done these sort of competitive procurements in other areas. And then just really quickly, I know we got a copy of the letter on the MDE lease that talked about the termination for convenience piece. Can you talk about the timing of, I think you all have seen it, but when did you get it, and what was the process to get it?
Eddie.
It was provided to us during field work. I think, as I said during the presentation, it says we respectfully request that the provision be removed. It doesn't say explicitly we will not provide financing. And moreover, the fact that ultimately it's the state that's paying for it, why are we giving up that leverage, by removing the termination for convenience clause?
But you did receive it during the audit?
We did.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much.
I have one final question, and I guess it could be a decent transition too as we move to the agency. But in some of the documents that we received from the agency, they talked about a new approach to state land. And you described it, Mr. Tannen, in your opening by saying we're really taking a new policy approach here by, instead of the state owning buildings, we seem to be moving to a leasing arrangement for our agencies. At any time in the course of your audit, was sort of that policy position shared with you as auditors, that this is a new approach and we are doing things differently?
I think as Brian said, I think the response changed several times. I think it started with, we want to stabilize the downtown tax base, and then it became we don't want to pay maintenance costs, and then it's hard to keep up because the reason for the decision seems to change, and ultimately we found very, very little documentation to explain it.
Okay. Thank you. One more question, Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, as always, to the great people in our Legislative Audits Department. I'm going back to number 9. If you can look at the first bullet, because these are public documents and this is a public hearing, I think this is important. So first off, bullet number 1 talks about the prior administration, prior secretary, and the award for $1.5 million for the State House rehabilitation. It says then that the procurements to rehabilitate historic structures are exempt. Bullet 2 says that exemption policy didn't even exist then. So first off, that seems contradictory and confusing. So I want to flag that, because you're saying in the first bullet, you're saying it was okay that they didn't have an RFP, and then the second one you're saying, well, actually, it didn't even exist. This policy didn't exist. So I wonder, sometimes when contractors, and I Mr. Tannen, like you, I'm not a real estate person, so I do not have expertise, but I do know that sometimes, especially with historic buildings, that sometimes when repair folks, experts, go in, they find, oh no, there's asbestos, oh no, there's water damage, oh no, and we didn't anticipate that. And that wasn't part of our bid, that wasn't part of our anticipated cost. So there are cost overruns. Could you educate us as to what hypothetically best practices might have been if there was a contract that was already approved and then there were cost overruns? Should they have gone back to the Board of Public Works multiple times, submitted, gotten permission, approval, review? Can you just say how that, in your opinion, could have or should have happened?
Bear with me as I flip to the findings so I could. Is the finding?
They would only have
What finding is it?
It's 9. They only have to go back to the board if there's a change in funding source. So even if there were overruns, they wouldn't have had to take it back. Good morning. So there were a lot of things in your statement. I think you started with saying that bullets 1 and 2 seemed a little contradictory. So they are exempt. A historic building is exempt by law. No, it was always exempt. The problem was the law also requires, if you're an exempt entity, that you have to develop a policy stating how you're going to handle those exempt items, where you would designate, oh, we're going to do competitive, or we're going to directly solicit because we know a good vendor. There was no policy in place. So in the first bullet, there's no policy, so we look at it as you did it as a sole source, and you didn't follow sole source requirements. There was nothing guiding you, and you did nothing.
Being the prior administration, prior secretary, right?
DGS.
It matters since DGS is about to come up here, and so there is the accountability piece that I just want to make sure is clear. And,
Yes.
And sometimes succeeding administrations have to, sometimes there's continuity and sometimes there's fix other problems, and so I just want to be clear about that. So so the next step was what could they or should they have done or could be doing when there are overruns?
If there are overruns, the only time that they have to go back to the board and the only time they took anything to the board is when there's a change in bond fundings, like capital funding. They don't have to take any other like general fund expenditures before the board under their historic exemption. So they only took like three things to the Board of Public Works. They took the initial 1.5 million award because that was using bond funds. When they changed to a different bond issuance and they were doing a change order, they took that. And then they changed bond funds again and they took that. But once they were into that bond, if they needed to do additional change orders under that had already gone once, they didn't have to take it back. And that is permitted by law. So overruns wouldn't necessarily come before the board.
So forgive me, I must be confused then. Finding 9 says you messed up. But you're saying A, it was exempt, and B, they didn't have to go back to the board more than they did. So what are we missing here in this?
All right, so I'm going to, if I can, I'm sorry, if I can. So there are 3 bullets. The first bullet is talking about.
4. If we're on the same page, there are literally 4 bullets, what I
You're
see
looking
on the
at,
screen and on my page.
All righty. The first one was disclosing the entire cost. I just want to make sure I'm.
Yeah.
The first one was,
They had a procurement, it was exempt. They were allowed to issue it, they did not have to follow state procurement regulations. The first bullet is saying, you're exempt, you should have a justification for the method that you used to go and procure it under your exemption. If I'm reading the second one, then we're talking about disclosing the total cost. The initial cost that was presented to the board did not include the entirety of the cost of the project. As Kathy was saying, it's a unique thing for capital projects where they don't have to go every time there's a contract modification, go back to the board, which is why we felt it was so strongly that they needed to go and initially, when they presented it to the board for funding, that they should have given them what the anticipated total cost of the project was. And then the third point that we said, when there were modifications for these changes to the costs, we could not see the support for how they came up for the dollar amounts of those modifications. And when we asked them, they said they were pre-funding for future expenditures and they couldn't give us the support.
Madam Chair, I'm still a little perplexed because what I'm seeing in bullet 3 is they didn't disclose the project cost, and what I'm hearing from our great auditors are they didn't have to. So I'm still a little confused, but I think it seems like you're ready to move on. I just want to make sure.
Senator, we could get back to you with a
That'd be
detailed
great.
explanation.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions from the committee? All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, we'd like to call up representatives from DGS. Mr. Secretary?
Feel free to bring
And your
your team
team.
up. Yeah.
Yep. Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and the Assistant Secretary. Please join us. Thank you.
And again, members, you should have a copy of the DGS presentation and the materials that were handed out. And just to be clear, this is not going on the screen. So DGS is going to refer to this, but you have it to follow along.
If I can just remind, if you can just put your mouth right up to the microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay to begin? Wonderful. So Chair Hedelman, Chair Solomon, and esteemed members of the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. For the record, I'm Matif Chaudhry, Secretary of the Maryland Department of General Services. With me here today, I have Deputy Secretary Chichi Nyanga-Nash, as well as our Assistant Secretary of Real Estate, Wendy Scott Napier, to answer any questions you may have. I wanted to first begin by thanking the DLS team and Office of Legislative Audits for their partnership and their diligent work in performing this audit. I will deviate a little bit from my talking points here, which I prepared. I know I've got a tight window here, but I will talk through initially and answer some of the questions that were asked. Primarily, when the vast majority of the leases as part of this analysis, with the exception of MDE, all of them were initiated, procured, approved, got Board of Public Works approval, and were executed under the prior administration. I also want to clarify, a lot of these findings relate to the state center relocations. And it's really important to note here that it was under the prior administration, under the direction of the governor, the Senate president, and the House Speaker, that there was an announcement that state center agencies would be relocating to the Baltimore City Central Business District. So that decision was made and that direction was provided under the prior administration. Prior administration moved forward with those leases, and our administration came into office at a time where all these leases were executed and we were already in the space planning phases. So I think that's important to note. And it's also important to note that under prior administrations previously in DGS's history, CBAs, or also as cost-benefit analyses, were basically non-existent. They didn't exist, with the exception of maybe one or two that we were able to locate. One was a cost-benefit analysis done in 2021, not as comprehensive as we would have liked, but that is a skill and a capability that DGS has developed under this administration. We spent quite a bit of time developing that. So under this administration, taking a look at leases that were already executed and already underway, we evaluated those and worked through the capability to validate those and do cost-benefit analyses. One of the questions that came up is that I will address is, and that OLA really honed in on, is why not a purchase option. I'll go into that a little bit. Number one, we looked at two major options as looking at these cost benefit analyses. One is renovate in place, the existing state center facilities as an example, or moving the commercial lease space, which was already underway. And the reason a purchase building was not looked at, and there's two main reasons for that. The first one is the direction had already been provided under the Speaker and Senate President and prior Governor to move forward. That was already underway. And it would be a lot of, actually, three reasons. The second reason there would be the time associated with that. It'd be a significant amount of time associated with coordination, the allocation of capital funding, looking for the actual identification of the building, and then once you buy a building, the actual renovation of that building. It's important to note, as with buying any building, it depends what's on the real estate market. It also depends on what the size is. If you're looking for a certain square footage, you're never going to find that exact square footage in a commercial building. So that's important to note. We would either be buying a building too large or too small, and we would be working through that process. We'd also would be buying it subject to existing leases in that building. We would have to navigate that as well. So there is a cost associated with the purchase, and then we would have to renovate those buildings to our exact specifications, the needs of each agency that we'd be relocating in there. Why is that important to note? That's important to note because, number one, it would be very expensive. The committee before you today is just an example for MDH alone. And the second thing is it would be very, very time-consuming in order to facilitate that. Buying a building subject to leases is challenging to navigate. You've got existing leases you may need to buy out or work with existing tenants on. And so I think it's also important to note here that under this new administration, we are looking to we validated these leases, and this information was provided to OLA as part of the analysis. I think and I'll talk a little bit about the misalignment here, but I can assure the entire committee here that the cost-benefit analyses that were conducted for validation far exceeded the analysis Mr. Tannen did to purchase his Toyota Corolla. And I will reiterate here that DGS uses industry best practices when it comes to procurement of leases. We procure leases in what's deemed to be a turnkey solution. So what does that mean? That means that DGS issues RFPs for leases where the landlord is responsible for all design and renovation costs. DGS spends an extensive period of time for space planning to prepare an agency to relocate. Usually it takes several months to do all that space planning. That identifies all of the space requirements and then negotiations with the landlord in order to identify viable options for that turnkey solution. So that is the strategy that's typically utilized. I've talked to my counterparts in other states, and this is sort of the industry best practices and what other states are moving towards as well. I wanted to also hit on the fact that there was our written testimony was pretty extensive in our response to OLA, and that was to provide additional background information that was needed from a perspective that may not have been fully outlined in OLA's analysis. And it was second to reiterate and ensure that both OLA and the committee know that DGS has taken this audit very seriously. Even though a lot of these are under prior administration, there are things that we wanted to work on and address and work through. And I want to also reiterate that I've identified the need, even before this audit initiated, for compliance within the agency. And I have hired the first ever, DGS ever, Chief Compliance Officer for the agency. She's in the audience here, been on the job for just 6 months now. But I've charged our new Chief Compliance Officer with working towards the goal of no repeat audits findings in the future. There's I believe, a clear misalignment here between OLA and DGS on the findings and our own assessment of things. And I think that's particularly regarding the accountability mechanisms for real estate grants and construction. And I will tell you here that in talking with the real estate team here, I think part of this misalignment has been where OLA was asking for specific documents. Well, the real estate team provided those documents, certain assumptions were made, and then when those findings started to be developed, That's when the real estate team said, wait a minute, you didn't ask for these other documents. You didn't ask for these CBAs, these cost benefit analyses that we have. So those are provided to help illustrate some of the justifications that were provided for each of these transactions. And, I think that probably, addresses some of the issues there. I think that there's issues here where we deem things to be not factually accurate, where we found that portions of the finding or analysis may have there may have been misalignment there on whether the findings should be made or whether DGS believes that it already met the necessary criteria to address the findings. You've addressed some of those and talked about some of those previously. I'll give one example, and that's finding 1 regarding the adequacy to support leases for State Center, which were totaling for relocation to the Central Business District. While I mentioned the initial cost benefit analysis that was done in 21. And I'm not here to defend that one because that was under a prior administration. It was not as adequate as we'd liked. But under this administration, they were done much more comprehensively. And with that, we were showing through our cost benefit analysis, the relocation to commercial lease space versus renovating the existing State Center buildings was $144 million savings over a 20-year period. I want to also highlight here that there was other examples of disagreements, or I call them misalignments between OLA and DGS. For instance, recommendation 1B, where OLA suggested documentation evaluating co-locations of agencies. Here, I would say that DGS preferred reducing space requirements for the RFPs in order to increase competition. What we have found is as you co-locate agencies and you increase your square footage requirements, you decrease competition. There's a limited number of buildings, for example, in the Central Business District of Baltimore City that can handle large space requirements. What does that mean? That means you have lower competition. You have increased rates because landlords know that there's a limited market out there for spaces of this magnitude. Another example is finding 9A, where OLA recommended justifying sole source procurements for the State House renovation project. That was mentioned previously, where it's a historic exemption, not legally required. And I think there was some misalignment there as well throughout this audit, where there, and I asked this to the auditors as part of during the audit process, as I was engaging, that, well, we meet legal requirements. Why would this be a finding? And some of that is a little subjective, related to what is best practices or what is transparency. But I will reiterate here that Mr. Tannen did indicate on the record here and confirm that OLA are not real estate experts. They're not industry experts in the field. And DGS has an Office of Real Estate that deals with real estate all day, every day. We have commercial real estate brokers under contract that work with us. They have a fiduciary responsibility to us. They only work for us full time. That particular firm assists us with the negotiation. They assist us with identification of properties, and they assist us with the execution of lease agreements. So being the real estate experts in this particular realm, it's our responsibility to move forward to address and get the best deal for the state. There are two big initiatives that were addressed in the OLA analysis that were discussed that I'll also hit on here. The first is the MDE lease. This particular lease, which was mentioned, was a 20-year lease renewal for MDE in Montgomery Park. In a 100-year-old building that's been a mainstay in the skyline of Southwest Baltimore. And I will say that DGS views this particular lease renewal in a much different lens than OLA. DGS negotiated this lease because it made fiscal sense, and it was in the best interest of the state. DGS secured a lease rate significantly below market rate and a reduced escalation rate compared to the prior lease, saving the state $3.5 million over a 20-year term in comparison to continuing on with the prior lease. DGS conducted cost-benefit analysis and verified that renewing the lease with the 10-year, $10 million renovation budget, there would be a savings of approximately $71 million over a 20-year span versus moving MDE to commercial lease space in the Central Business District. In addition to these cost savings, this 20-year lease renewal also reiterates the state's commitment to sustain investment in Southwest Baltimore. This lease keeps MDE's 1,000 employees in Southwest Baltimore in a critical investment to that community. We weren't afraid or deterred for extending this lease under this administration, especially considering that adding years to the lease would allow us to lock in market rate, below market lease rates, have long overdue upgrades, green installations, safety improvements, continue with free parking for all employees and emergency equipment vehicles that they have, and modernizations for the space there. It's included, what should be critical here as well is that part of this renovation budget included the refurbishment of the existing cubicles on site that prevented 900 plus cubicles from ending up in the landfill. One of the things OLA mentioned was a capital budget segment where DGS mentioned about the capital budget for this particular lease. So I think that was taken a little bit out of context. The question was asked, why didn't you procure cubicles? Why didn't you, have a capital budget or have funding for the renovation, as an example? And the answer to that question is that we follow industry best practices. And our standard methodology is to negotiate with landlords, to have landlords cover all the lease costs, with all the renovation costs, the design and construction, and bake that into our rate, where we still pay at or below market rate for leases. And that's why there is no need for a capital budget. I think the statement there was just reiterating that fact that there is no need for a capital budget for these types of lease arrangements. Another issue was brought up, obviously, I mentioned it before, was the state center leases. I think we are all aligned on the fact that state center has provided significant challenges that have spanned multiple administrations. Under this administration, we performed our cost-benefit analyses and followed up. And again, the other part, there's a lot has changed in the real estate market, commercial real estate market, in a post-COVID world. And with regard to state center leases that were identified in the OLA analysis, I think it's important to note, and I mentioned it, that our analysis did identify for state center and the DHS lease a cost savings of $144 million over that 20-year span, which contributed to this administration continuing forward with the relocation of agencies to the Baltimore Central Business District, even after that commitment was made to the city. The OLA analysis also questions leasing relocation or purchasing a building, and I touched base on that. It's important, I do want to touch base a little bit on the MDH lease, where it is highlighted where $200+ million over a 15-year span were being $278 million was going to be provided to a landlord for a lease over a 15-year period, where that building was purchased for $7 million. That sounds like a great news bite, where a landlord bought a building for $7 million, and they're going to have this huge windfall by they're going to get rental income for $280 million over 15 years. It sounds great. Part of the issue is the analysis from OLA does not take into account the $110+ million that are required to renovate that building to meet not just DGS standards, but to meet the exact specifications of the agency itself. It also does not take into account the maintenance, repair, parking costs, and other operational costs that are included in the rental rate over that 15-year span. It's important to note that that is a 500,000 square foot lease requirement. That is the largest DGS lease that the agency has ever done, and it is a massive requirement. Under this administration, we've developed these capabilities to do the cost-benefit analysis for two main reasons. One is so that we're evaluating all viable options. And I do want to highlight on the word viable options, right? And I think that's where there's some misalignment between DGS and OLA, where we were looking at viable options from a different lens from them. And I hit on the fact that where we were primarily looking at options for renovating in place or relocating the commercial lease space based on time constraints, based on prior commitments, and based on industry best practices. I think that's an important distinction there. And the second reason there is to issue strategic real estate decisions that are being made in the best interest of the state in this really challenging fiscal climate. And I think everyone here in this room is concerned about the challenging fiscal climate that not just this state, but all states are facing. And we are absolutely committed to ensuring that we are making strategic decisions, especially long-term leasing decisions that will benefit the state significantly. I think that it's important to note that this cost-benefit analysis capability that DGS is developing and continuing to refine is important because this administration inherited a real estate portfolio that includes over 1,400 state-owned buildings that are suffering from decades of deferred maintenance. DGS, our design and construction and energy team, is currently tracking over $1 billion in deferred maintenance costs from our existing state-owned facilities. I want to caveat that a little bit and hit that point a little bit harder, where that $1 billion is just to keep those buildings operational. That is not to build new. That is not to completely renovate. That is not to do a capital project. That is just to continue operating those buildings. DGS initially focused these cost-benefit analyses for DGS state-owned buildings located in Baltimore City. These analyses have shown that the state will save over $326 million over the course of the next 20 to 25 years through data-driven, thoughtfully executed real estate transactions and leases of nearly a dozen state agencies to modern, efficient lease space that allows us to better serve Marylanders. I think it's really important to note that part of our analysis and cost-benefit analysis that we've done, again, new capability within DGS for the first time here, includes a cancellation of 3 capital projects that were programmed under the prior administration. DGS did analyses of these and determined that it was not in the state's best interest to move forward in those, with those projects. The cancellation of those 3 capital projects resulted in $285 million reverting back to the state's capital budget. And those were projects that were in buildings that were aging and had infrastructure challenges that we were still working to address. And we are working now to relocate those agencies to commercial lease space to really get those savings. While DGS typically worries about the dollars and cents when we're looking at these cost-benefit analyses, there's really other important factors that should be factored into this, not just the quantitative, but the qualitative. For example, the renovation of the 6 St. Paul Street building or the Nancy Grassman building. Those were both nearly $100 million renovations for old building infrastructures. When we did our cost-benefit analyses, it made a lot more sense, and there was a lot of cost savings to move them to commercial lease space, all those agencies. The other qualitative factor there, too, is DGS will be working very closely with the city for redevelopment and disposition of those buildings. And that's important because putting those back into private developers' hands will mean that they go back onto the city's tax rolls to help support Baltimore City. Under the Moore Miller administration, I will say that we recognize that data-driven decisions as well as thorough documentation, and we have made that a priority under this administration. And while this level of analysis and documentation has not been done before, we are very committed to making it a cornerstone of our broader plan for improved transparency and accountability in managing the state's real estate portfolio. I'm also very excited to share that under this administration, DGS will be expanding our analysis beyond our own state-owned, our own DGS-owned facilities to begin the first of its kind statewide facilities master planning effort. This will take a holistic approach to examine all state-owned and state-leased facilities, totaling more than 30 million square feet across the state. And we'll be focusing on ensuring that the state is strategically investing the right resources in the right locations in a manner that's in the state's best interest. This effort will analyze the state's massive portfolio of 334 leases, incorporating over 6 million square feet, and our 1,400 plus state-owned buildings, totaling nearly 25 million square feet, located in all 24 jurisdictions across our great state. This master planning effort will involve analyzing potential options for right-sizing the state's real estate portfolio to ensure the state is investing funding in a fiscally responsible manner. I do want to really harp on this a little bit here, where this has never been done before. The state's looked at our leases to a certain degree. The state previously has looked at our state-owned facilities to a certain degree. But the state's never taken a holistic approach to look at all our space requirements across the entire space, whether it's state-owned or we're in commercial buildings, and do a deep dive. We'll be bringing a consultant on board to support these efforts very soon. But in this fiscally challenging climate, this administration and DGS, we firmly believe that this is the right thing to do, to make very strategic decisions, that will, for this administration, but things that will outlive this administration. And we believe there will be significant decisions that will be very strategic to find significant cost savings. From OLA's audit, I think the common ground here is that we get our numbers and decisions right an overwhelming majority of the time. We're proud that while we're not perfect, we've worked to ensure that any oversight or deficiency in documentation on our end is remedied moving forward. My goal here today, in my initial talking point, is not to get in the weeds on each finding. Instead, highlight some of the examples where there may have been some logical and expected misalignment between OLA and DGS on certain issues, but at the same time recognize that we all have the same interests at heart and believe in a shared and common goal to make decisions that best serve the interests of all Marylanders whom we all serve. DGS is committed to closing that gap and continuing to make meaningful progress in areas identified for improvement. Let me close by saying that this audit has provided an opportunity for our team to self-reflect and evaluate our processes. We know that every public building, plot of land, and leased office space in our portfolio represents more than just brick and mortar. It represents public investment. At DGS, transparency goes beyond spreadsheets and records. It's about remembering that every square foot we manage belongs to the people of this great state. We just don't manage property or transactions, we manage trust, and we will work to earn it every day. I want to thank you for this opportunity, and we are happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you being here with your team. And I have a couple of questions before we move to committee members. But I did just want to say, I think there were you made a couple of comments that I wanted to just kind of maybe respond to because the presiding officers are not here. I think the policy of pursuing a move away from state center does not necessarily obviously preclude a move to leases as opposed to purchasing buildings. I think that was more of a reflection on the state of State Center itself and that parcel in Baltimore. And obviously a move away from State Center does not give DGS a carte blanche to not do its job and do a proper evaluation of, again, the cost benefit of a move versus a lease versus purchasing a new building elsewhere. So I just wanted to get that on the record as well. I guess, you and I had a long conversation, and I appreciated that you all did send the cost-benefit analysis to the committee, again, albeit pretty late on the MDH move, because obviously that is the one that is, that's the biggest, that's sort of the most, the most amount of money that we're talking about. I think it's frustrating. I'll just share that the OLA folks did not get that in their analysis, as Mr. Tannen mentioned. I think that would have provided some more illumination in the audit prior to us getting the document and giving maybe OLA an opportunity to do more of their work. Were you involved in that lease at all in your previous role at the Department of Health as the Deputy Secretary of Operations back in 2022?
So as Deputy Secretary of Operations in my prior role, I was not on the evaluation committee. Or involved in that. So that was a separate evaluation committee. There were members of the MDH team that were involved, but I was not part of the evaluation committee.
Your responsibility for the actual facilities, you didn't play a role in evaluating whether it was beneficial for MDH to move, whether it was, to a new building that was leased versus purchased. Were you involved in putting the procurement together or doing any of the evaluation or trying to figure out what the space would look like for the new agency?
So
the agency's new space?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Great question. Was involved in the space planning process. So DGS coordinates very closely with agencies for space planning. So was involved in the space planning, identifying number of cubicles, break rooms, conference rooms, et cetera, to meet the agency's need, but also at a 5-year projection. So involved in that process. And if I could, Mr. Chair, too, I do want to hit a couple things here on what you addressed. And I think there's a few things there when it comes to the purchase option. I think the commitment previously was made to fill the reason to move to the Central Business District was to fill the vacancy rate in the commercial lease buildings. That was one of the primary concerns, to fill the vacancy rate to support the landlords in a post-COVID world, with everyone downsizing their space. I think the other thing important to note there is there was ongoing litigation at the time with State Center, which impacted the capability to redevelop the site. Which made renovation more of an opportune option. Also, in evaluations, and I think this is part of the misalignment, I think, between DGS and OLA, Mr. Chairman here, where the team here at the real estate team at DGS, it's almost common sense that purchasing a new building will absolutely cost more to purchase and renovate. Some of the issues I mentioned previously, not being able to find the right size building, the renovation costs, et cetera, dealing with other leases, all those seemed very much in best practices, but part of the analysis that's typically done when looking at it. And we've committed to do additional documentation to support these going forward, but I think at the time that was part of it, and that's why under the cost benefit analyses that were done, it was very much a common sense issue that purchasing will absolutely be another increased cost. And I do want to caveat there, but there were some instances as part of our cost benefit analysis, we did actually evaluate the construction of new buildings as well. So that was something we certainly evaluated as an option. It is very much dependent on a building by building, case by case basis.
So let me clarify on that, because clearly this cost benefit analysis that we were given on MDH was done after the lease was finished, because it says description approved under the option 2 building lease. It says approved 2022 operating lease. So obviously you were able to do this analysis after the lease was signed in 2022. So was the building purchase and renovation option, again, I think the state center piece, I think that ship has sailed. Obviously that building was in pretty terrible disrepair. That obviously was going to cost a tremendous amount of money to take care of. So I'm less concerned about the state center option, because I think, again, that ship had sailed, the policy decision had been made. I'm less concerned about that. Was the building purchase and renovation option assessed prior to signing the lease? Not afterwards, but prior to signing the lease in 2022?
So Wendy Scott Napier, Assistant Secretary of Real Estate, can sort of chime in here. We did do we as in DGS under the prior administration did a cost benefit analysis in 21. Again, not as comprehensive as we would have liked.
I would just add, we certainly explored the topic at the time of acquiring land, but there.
I'm not asking acquiring land. It says building purchase and renovation. That's essentially what the leasee did, and I'm not asking about a general. Was there a cost benefit analysis done of the building lease prior to the signing in 2022 and the option of purchasing a building and renovating it? That's precisely what I'm asking, not purchasing land, purchasing a building.
Okay, the 2021 cost benefit analysis did not look at acquiring a separate off-site building. It just looked at leasing, renovating State Center, or building a new building on the campus.
So what you're telling me is an apples to apples comparison was not done in 2021? So
I guess I would need to what you just received recently.
Well, so our option here is option 2 is building lease, option 3 is building purchase and renovation. So that's essentially what we were doing under the lease. The building was purchased by the developer for $7 million. Obviously, it requires extensive renovation, and that is factored into the cost here. What I'm asking is, was a similar evaluation done of the state finding a building in maybe a similar state of disrepair, purchasing it, renovating it, and the building being owned by the state?
No, that analysis was not done. And it was in part because there were no buildings that were available for sale at the time. But no, that was not done.
Okay. I think that is problematic. The other piece on here that I guess I'm confused on, I've served on the Appropriations Committee my entire time in the General Assembly, which I feel really honored, and I've been on the Capital Budget Committee with some of my colleagues here for part of that time as well. I guess I don't also fully understand, so I have a lot of pages here. This is on page 2 of the evaluation of the cost benefit analysis. It says the project would take this is on the column, again, on the option 3 at the very bottom where it says timeline for occupancy. It says the project would take 9 to 11 years to complete, beginning with the capital budget submission, which requires approval 5 years in advance of a construction project. Again, we add and subtract things from the CIP on an annual basis that are based on emergencies, that are based on needs. I don't understand why that says 5 years in advance. Again, unless I've missed something, why couldn't we have, if you had a plan, you being DGS or the previous administration in DGS, why couldn't have they come to us and said, we found a building, we purchased it, or we're planning to purchase it, and we want to start renovations on it literally in 12 months. Can you add money to MDH or DGS's capital budget to get this done?
So great question, Mr. Chairman. I'll take that question. That timeline is the standard timeline for the capital improvement program. So typically, in order to do any capital project, any agency, DGS as an example, will have to complete
Right,
a
well,
Part 1 and Part 2 program.
I don't
and-
mean to interrupt you. I think it's incredibly misleading to say that this project would take 9 to 11 years to complete, and I'm assuming part of this justification is to say, well, it's going to take 5 years in advance for us to put money in the capital budget, when then on the flip side, you have here that the rental and lease would take 36 to 48 months to complete. Again, we could have allocated, unless I'm missing something, we could have allocated money literally in March or April that would have become available to you all, to the agency, July 1st. So that's not a 5-year timeline. That would have been significantly enhanced, especially if we're purchasing a building. Building from scratch obviously is a different process. So that's, when you put this in black and white in an agency document, that is not accurate.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that would be going against the typical standard methodology for a capital improvement program and a capital project, right?
But you ask, I mean, again, I don't mean to press this point, but you ask for adjustments all the time. Again, I've served on the Appropriations Committee for almost 8 years. We often get requests in the capital budget all the time. Again, things change, right? Just because a building is planned, things change, agency needs change, So again, putting a 5-year, you could have put a footnote in here that said often CIP requests take a long amount of time, or you could have said, we could have expedited this. Again, the Appropriations Committee, we work hand in glove with the administration to make sure that we're meeting the capital needs of our agencies. And I guess the last point I will make is putting in here that this requires 5 years advanced planning seems disingenuous and inaccurate.
Mr. Chairman, I would actually tend to disagree with that. I think that's the standard methodology going forward on a capital program. All the capital projects I've ever been involved in over many, many years, you follow the standard process and procedure. You have to justify the project, right? Typically, you've got to justify, you do a Part 1 or Part 2 program of requirements, DGS, DBM approves that, then you focus that into, you work to get that into the capital budget. And I understand, Mr. Chairman, that there may have been an opportunity there to maybe move it up in the capital budget, but the planning work takes time. To plan for that, to program that in, to have a proper justification for that. Again, I'm a process person. I want to make sure we follow all the proper procedures. Those include doing the proper analysis up front, doing a Part 1 that justifies the project, doing a Part 2 which sets out all the space specifications. I've worked on many of those. Those are very comprehensive documents that the legislature requires, DGS, DBM, require to justify these capital improvements. And I know, sir, that where there's many times a capital budget's adjusted, I don't think it happens very often on initiating a new project of this magnitude, which could be, $200 million, $300 million plus. Typically, you'd want to do, and I'm assuming the legislature would want us to do our due diligence to properly program that in.
Right, well, so you literally just made my point for me, because apparently we didn't do the due diligence on the $217 million that is going to be annually expended on capital improvements to a building that somebody else owns. So I would have assumed that on the MDH property, that was all done, and you have just told me that it was not, that was all done prior to the lease being signed in 2022, because this $218 million for renovations, or excuse me, for rent, is not a capital expense. Right, that is coming out of the annual operating expenses of
Correct.
MDH. So you're sort of comparing apples and oranges here. I think we've kind of beaten this horse to death.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, my apologies.
Well, I was just going to, I mean, if you want to respond to that, I had another question for you.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, this was done under the prior administration. I can't speak to what was done under the prior administration, why they did or did not look at these cost-benefit analysis. Again, under this administration, we have developed that capability. We've built that up, that capability here, and going forward, we are doing very comprehensive cost-benefit analyses. I have questioned every capital budget that has been in the program when I came into this position. And everything program will make sure that we have all our cost-benefit analyses done in order. And again, I can't speak to what happened under the prior administration, but we'll certainly going forward make sure that all these are properly evaluated and we have the proper cost-benefit analyses conducted.
Well, and that's obviously not your fault that the previous secretary is not here, and so you're sort of the object of our ire and the committee's ire in answering these questions. I guess the last question that I have on the MDH lease is, again, I guess it's a two-parter. I am not a real estate expert, so because I'm sure this document will be public at some point, I would like you to just sort of explain in layman's terms. So the the option 2 building lease has 463,000 net square feet. versus option 3, which is 600,000 of gross square feet. Can you just real quick, for the record, talk about the difference between that and what it's measuring?
That is a great question, Mr. Chairman, and I will tell you, so DGS aggressively negotiates our leases. And I'll go a little in the weeds here. We negotiate what's called net usable square footage. And if you're in the real estate world, you'll understand that a standard commercial tenant pays for some certain common areas. Restrooms, as an example. When we negotiate our lease rates, we pay just the usable area that we are actually occupying. We don't pay for any common areas. We don't pay for restrooms and things of that nature. So our space requirements, therefore, are smaller. We're paying less rent because we have we leverage the state's buying power to negotiate that net usable square footage. And what is called an efficiency factor. So in the real estate industry, it's called an efficiency factor. You take net usable and then you go, or usable, you go to gross. So that is the gross square footage of the building. So if we needed, as an example, 463,000 square feet net usable, we will physically occupy. We would need roughly around 600,000 square feet on a 1.3 efficiency factor. That factors in elevator lobbies, mechanical rooms, restrooms, the penthouse, anywhere where there's going to be equipment for the HVAC, all that other shared space is included in there as part of our efficiency factor. So sorry to get in the weeds, but that's sort of standard real estate terminology.
No, I think that's helpful for folks that'll be looking at this. That's why I wanted to just ask you that. And then I guess the last question on the MDH lease. So again, maybe somebody on your team can help me on this one. So why is it that the estimate of capital costs, if the state owned a building, purchased a new building, again, excluding State Center because that had its own problems that I think, again, are well documented. But if we purchased a new building and we had to renovate it to MDH's specifications, why is the cost of, so that says $242 million for renovation costs, again, this is on page 3 of the analysis, versus what ultimately, and I don't know that we have a complete breakdown, I think it was in the audit report, it said $187 million, I think, for the landlord to renovate the building up to MDH's specification. So why the difference of, I guess, about 60 million, 70 million in terms of costs for renovating a state-owned building that was newly purchased versus the landlord renovating the building?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's a great question. I think in that particular example, we're looking at a hypothetical building. It's not a particular building, so we have to factor in contingency. We have to factor in that we might be buying a building that needs significant work. So that's for budgeting purposes, and again, it's just for budgeting purposes, we would put that in there just to when we're doing our evaluation. We don't want to certainly undercut ourselves and assume we're going to get a building in great shape. It will obviously depend on what's available in the market and the current condition of any building if we were to make that purchase.
Okay, and I guess the last statement that I'll make, and then I'll turn over to our colleagues. Well, I guess maybe it's part statement, part question. So, I mean, if you're looking at, leasing a floor of a building for a small agency, I think that's a very different conversation than a building the size of MDH, where 15 years to me seems like a very short time span to be measuring, because I would expect, and my experience in sort of facilities is more on the school construction side of things from my previous work, but you don't expect a school building to if we were comparing building a school building versus leasing a school building, you would expect the lifespan of that building to be significantly longer than 15 years, right? It may require a refresh in 15 years, the HVAC may require an upgrade in 15 years, but we're not talking about a completely new building. So again, the MDH example, to me, it does seem a little, I mean, again, it's problematic that the previous administration did not do a full evaluation of similar options. That, again, is not your fault. But it seems inappropriate to only measure that 15-year lifespan, because 15 years of us owning a building with a small refresh, it seems like we might recoup quite a bit more savings in the lifespan of that building versus just a 15-year lease.
It's a great question, Mr. Chairman, and that's why we typically look at a 20 or 25-year span for these large lease requirements. So very similar to the MDE lease, the 263,000 square feet, same situation. Very large lease requirements. We absolutely look at longer lease terms to lock in the best rates, but at the same time, we look at the renovation costs as well as the amortization of that. So So you're 100% right. Typically, we look at a 20 to 25-year span. 20 years we've been using as a general rule of thumb. After 20 years, typically, some additional capital investments will be required associated with that. The analysis you have before you here, and obviously, I know we chatted previously before this, but it allows us to flex up and down. We just wanted to compare apples and apples, so you had a little bit of a good sense of what that would look like. But that is something that our normal cost-benefit analyses are based on a 20-year span.
So, all right, let me just ask the question, and I don't know that you know the answer to this, but maybe your colleagues do. Why was the MDH lease only 15 years?
So, I can't speak to that, Mr. Chairman. That was under the prior administration. I believe it was what was negotiated at the time. Was it a 15 and 2 5s?
It was a 15-year term with, I think, a 5-year renewal option. So we had a 20-year term, but we would have had to gone back for board approval for the second 5 years.
Is there anybody still on the team who was here from the previous administration?
Wendy was here during that time period.
All right, well, so then there is still some responsibility. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here and for your opening remarks. A number of times you made reference to cost-benefit analyses and how many that, and you can tell me if I quoted it wrong, but you had talked many times about misalignment between OLA and their report and your response, and that they had requested documents and you provided them, and that they didn't ask for the cost-benefit analyses. And I heard our friends at OLA in their remarks, as well as in their responses to our colleagues, discuss multiple times that they did not see documentation that justified what you are asserting, which is that this is in the best interest of the state, financially, et cetera. So my question is pretty direct. Where are the cost-benefit analyses for each of these decisions, and can you provide them to us?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Happy to provide them to you and the committee.
And I guess my question is, why weren't they provided to OLA throughout the audit process?
A great question. So they were provided to OLA. I think there was some...
I'm sorry, they were provided to OLA?
They were provided to OLA, yes.
Okay. OLA has said that they do not have them.
So, again, I think there may have been some misalignment there initially.
Well, I guess, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is a factual question. Do they exist or don't they exist? Were they provided or not?
Yes, and they were they were sent over June 3rd to OLA.
For each of the decisions that are discussed in the report? For MDH, for MDE, for MSDE?
For State Center, yes, I believe. Which ones were sent over, Wendy?
Everything for State Center was sent on June 3rd.
Well, wait a minute. I just want to jump in here. You said that they had not received this document. This was the MDH analysis that you all provided to us at 9 p.m. last night. Did you send this to OLA on June 3rd?
Mr. Chairman, this was formatted for you to make it easily digestible for you.
But this information had been provided to them before?
The information had been provided regarding the renovation and building lease option.
On MDH?
On MDH, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. I will turn this over to Senator Brooks. Oh, I'm sorry. What is Delegate Aarons?
I was going to say Delegate Aarons. I know you've been
I'm
waiting.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Delegate Aarons was first.
I won't be that long. Appreciate you being here, and I do appreciate your comments. Quick question. If the previous commission were here, the previous administration, because we're kind of caught up in this, secretaries have no responsibility, would they answer these questions differently, do you think, that were presented to you? Would they sit in here, I didn't do it, I don't have it, I don't do this, I didn't do that? Would that be the answer? So it's our, I mean, but how much effort was put into this response? Because if you had this document, if you were sitting in my seat and you read this document, you're not really doing a good job out there, because you've had this audit for, it's 2024 was when it started. We've been in this session, if you will, for a couple years now, that these answers could have been had. So what we did was we don't answer these questions. We blame those guys because they're not asking the right questions. You're not giving the right answers. So we sit back and we blame it on the last guy. And I've said this in past hearings. You're going to be the last guy one day. And when I look at these responses, it looks like there was very little thought went into them. There was just sit back, well, you know what? If it didn't happen on my watch, it doesn't matter. That doesn't count. That's the way it reads. And if you read this differently, I appreciate your comment on it, because you certainly don't talk like that when you're talking about these issues that were presented to you. You talk like you have a handle on it all. But yet these things had nothing, so we're sitting up here listening, reading this, getting this. We get it from one group first, then we get you. We can't interact and contradict you because apparently you guys don't talk. And what we fail to do is we don't act like we're the state of Maryland. We act like we're one department and then we're the audit committee. We're not working in the best interest of Maryland, because you know what? I wouldn't go back and blame the last guy. I'd sit down and find out. If you think for 1 minute that they didn't have experts on their staff that couldn't have answered these questions and addressed them, that's just an easy way out. And it's very frustrating for me to sit up here and judge you based on this and then judge them based on what you say, because you know what? I still don't know who to believe.
So Delegate, thank you for your comments here. I will say, I can't speculate under what happened under the prior administration.
But you did. You've done it. You sat back and said it was a previous administration. It's not the previous. You have the same people working for you, sir, that you had before. You might have different staff, different upper echelon, but the same people that did this work here, we're saying, you know what, they didn't do their job. That's what you're telling me in this last thing, that the last administration, those people who we hired and they're good employees, didn't do their job because we can't answer the questions. And I will promise you that if I had them in here right now, they would answer these questions and it wouldn't all be sitting back saying, I can't provide, I can't provide. Wouldn't you agree?
So Delegate, I would say that cost-benefit analyses were done in 2021. Not as comprehensive as we would have liked under this administration. So I've mentioned that previously. We have developed that skill set and capability here. We're doing much more comprehensive cost-benefit analyses on all these transactions and all capital projects going forward to make sure that we are doing our due diligence with taxpayer dollars.
That's a great answer, because you know what? They had, with what they had, they did the same job you did. They did with what they have, I believe. I don't believe these people just sat out there and said, I'm not going to answer these questions because it's a different philosophy. The only thing that changed right now really is you and your staff change, but the group of people that work and do the work, they're being told that they didn't do the job. They just really have failed the state of Maryland based on your comments and what you said today. Those people probably should all be fired based on what I'm hearing, but they shouldn't be.
Well, Delegate, I wouldn't necessarily say that. And what I mean by we've developed that capability, we've worked to train staff and build that capability to what is industry standards, what is best practices, what should we be doing when we're evaluating these large-scale capital projects, right? I just don't think that was a standard practice in the agency for many decades. It just wasn't there. That was not something that the agency typically looked at. Under this administration, we're looking at things differently. And Delegate, I did want to also comment here on the relationship with OLA. I am absolutely committed to renewing this relationship with OLA. I actually, right before this meeting, I actually had to apologize to OLA because my new chief compliance officer is constantly engaging with them on everything, because we are very, very motivated to look at these findings, see which ones absolutely we should be addressing and how, and to work to ensure that we don't get repeat findings. I am absolutely committed to making sure that we have that relationship with OLA. I am a huge believer that we all want to say, we all serve the taxpayers.
If, sir, with all due respect, if that's happening, these responses wouldn't be this way. And I'll go back. I'm more concerned right now because what I get out of these hearings, and I've gotten it every hearing, every time I hear somebody blame the last guy, what we're doing is we're blaming the people that do the work. And those people are doing the work. They're trying to do the work, but it's easier to sit back and say, don't worry about it. It's the last guy's fault.
Well, Delegate, I will say that it is new direction under this leadership, under my leadership, new direction under this administration to do more comprehensive benefit analysis. This is asking the team to look at things from a different perspective, better document, to do the analysis. Even though something might make common sense not to do, let's document and do these analyses to make sure that we're getting our best, making the best decision. And for not just for audit purposes, but for the next folks that are in this role down the road.
But he's going to reinvent, or they're going to reinvent the wheel. He or she's going to reinvent the wheel again. because they're going to come in with, they're going to get an audit. It's not going to say exactly what this one says, but you know what? Everything you didn't do or did do based on this, you're going to be the guy that we're going to blame, not the person that's there then.
And Delegate, I will say that people in my position in leadership roles, our job is to do the absolute best we can to make the place better than where we found it. And that's my commitment
Not at
to
the
do that.
expense of the employees, because this audit tells me that those people that used to work in the last administration did not do their job based on your comments. And you've had 2 years of doing this job. So I'm assuming that nothing in this thing matters, everything in here is fixed based on when you got here. Is that correct?
Well, Delegate, I'm not certainly blaming employees. I'm saying that under the prior administration or prior administrations multiple, there was not the directive or direction to do these comprehensive cost benefit analyses. We are changing that. We are changing the model to do that under this administration.
I apologize, but I think you're throwing employees who do good work under the bus with those types of comments, that they weren't doing their job. I think they were doing their jobs just as well as everybody in this room is doing their jobs. It's just that we want to sit back and say, you know what, that's an easy way out. And this is no easy way out. These are taxpayer dollars we're dealing with. You make it sound in here that we just invented something new, and nothing you're saying today is new. Nothing here is earth-shattering or leading edge, if you will. People have been doing these transactions forever.
Delegate Ahrens, thank you. Appreciate the comments. I think we're going to have to move on just in the interest of time.
I appreciate that, Chair, but I was trying to get my point across. I'll yield.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to note for everyone, we have to wrap up by 1:30, so please be attentive to the time. And with that, I will turn to Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think we're going to move on to something else now. Let's go to finding number 11, if you will. That's the inventories. Yeah, the report said the DGS did not perform inventory compliance audit to ensure the state agencies complied with state property and equipment requirements. And the
Senator Brooks, could you speak directly into the mic, please?
I most certainly
Thank you so
can.
much. Thank you. Perfect.
All you had to do is nudge me. Okay, finding number 11,
Sure.
and it says DGS did not perform inventory compliance audits to ensure the state agencies complied with state property and equipment requirements. And I guess you concurred there, and OLE's recommendation said on line item B that you would consider developing a policy to prioritize audits consistent with available resources. So consider means that you're considering it, or are you going to be doing the audits?
Great question. I think so. We've hired additional staff in order to do these audits, and we are working to do on-site physical audits. The reason we sort of disagreed, and we were going back and forth with OLA on this, is they asked for a policy that if you are short-staffed, that you have the capability to complete those functions. We are committed to working with OLA offline to make sure that this, in fact, policy is actually needed. And again, their finding is consider it, not necessarily do it. And we'll work with them offline to see if that's necessary. For us, any type of minor role within a respective unit, we don't have policies for everything. That's more of a management function, we see it as, where managers are responsible for reprioritizing resources when there is limited resources to serve core functions. So that's something we would certainly be looking to do. But again, very happy, Senator, to work with OLA offline and see if this is a policy that's actually needed.
Okay. Well, one other question. What is the capitalization threshold for assets? Buildings, equipment, software, at what
For inventory or
cost?
purchases? For purchases or?
For assets, like equipment, it could be, improvements. I mean, you capitalize at what cost level?
Right. So we track inventory, everything above $500, unless it's sensitive related inventory, and then it is tracked otherwise. Capitalized, we can get back to you on the exact dollar amount.
Okay.
And the level that we typically do
Okay.
for the capitalization.
500, I seem that would be for a
Five-
state,
500
5,000.
just for inventory purposes.
Oh, inventory
Inventory for
purposes.
track.
Okay.
The stickers you see on inventory,
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's
Right,
$500.
okay.
That's our threshold for that.
I see. All
The
right,
state's
okay.
threshold.
All right, thanks. I'm very easy on this one. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Harrison. Oh, was Delegate Lehman first? They sort of popped up. Delegate Lehman, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. Thank you to our two co-chairs, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service to the state, and thank you for your presentation. So of the many concerns I have about OLA's findings, I think one of the biggest probably for me is finding number 1 on page 5 about the lack of transparency by DGS with the Board of Public Works. I mean, the BPW is a kind of check on DGS and is trying to make decisions to the best of its ability based on accurate information. So my question is, not being transparent, as described on page 5 in various ways, seems rather deliberate. And so I'm wondering where that decision gets made. First of all, is it always the secretary that goes before the Board of Public Works, or is it sometimes staff in your place?
So thank you, Delegate, for the question. I'm typically there for every Board of Public Works meeting. For leases, our leases historically for the Office of Real Estate, and this is a practice over many decades, has been to identify the actual initial first-year cost with escalation. We've worked with BPW staff, and that's been deemed to be legally sufficient to meet the requirements because you can extrapolate the total cost of the lease. OLA raised concerns regarding transparency and or best practices to identify the total cost. So we've worked offline, and we've committed to ensuring that we've updated our BPW agenda items for leases. This was completed back in July, where now we've updated those to include total cost, so we reflect the total cost of the lease in addition to the escalation rate. So it's very transparent and very clear. So again, while it's not necessarily legally required, we recognize the fact that for transparency's sake, it is in the state's best interest to do that. We've already made those changes and adjustments.
So I didn't see where you answered. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you, so I'm watching the board. I didn't see where you answered. Is it typically the secretary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the buck stops with you. That's fair to say.
Sure.
And so I guess to the point about it being intentional, I'm glad to hear if you're making, changes. But it's very clear on page 5 the ways in which the agency was not transparent. I think the best example probably is the last bullet point saying that DGS was only reporting first-year costs of leases instead of a full 10 to 15-year sort of description, and didn't present other costs, such as the money that had to be spent on parking associated with 8 leases. So I guess what I want to ask you is for a commitment to us here and to the taxpayers of Maryland that your agency will be fully transparent with the Board of Public Works going forward so it can make informed decisions about these lease versus purchasing decisions and other things.
So Delegate, quick question. I'll sort of reiterate my prior comments and add a little bit to them. So we've already made the adjustments to the Board of Public Works agenda items to, we had on there initially the first-year lease with escalation that was deemed to be legally sufficient for many, many years in accordance with the Board of Public Works coordinating with them. We have updated, in the spirit of transparency, our agenda items to reflect total lease cost. So that is reflected on there, as well as parking, if parking is included. So all that work has already been done and updated. Our agenda items were updated in July of this year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I hope that you can hear me well. I am going to kind of piggyback, or I'm going to agree with my colleague, and though we may be on separate sides of the aisle, I agree. We don't need to do any finger pointing as to who did what, when, or why. What we need to do is get to the bottom line, find resolution, answer questions appropriately and completely, so that each of us who are responsible to all of the citizens of Maryland have everything that they need, all of the information that they need to understand what's going on. We all live here. It's all of our tax dollars. Those of you, us, anyone who lives here, it's ours. And so I'm not interested in finger pointing. I really don't care about what the past administration did and who did it, why they did it. What I do know is that in each level of government, regardless of who changes at the top, the majority of the people who are there have been there for years, and so they transcend administrations. And so there should be some sort of continuance, some sort of information sharing, and if there needs to be a change, then changes should be made. With that, also the standing operating procedures, which leads me into my question, because one of the things that you said was that you work to follow the procedures that are in place. And I'm just going to go back to the question that I had previously, and it's just as an example. I'm going back to finding 9, which was originally on our slide 13, that talked about the historic buildings, in that they are exempt from some procurement justifications, but that there should be some sort of a policy in place to say why you're sole sourcing or you're not sole sourcing, basically. And according to this finding, there was nothing there. And if policies are in place, why are they not being followed? And I know you're going to say that that was from the previous administration. I don't really care about that. Are you implementing standard operating procedures so that it is written that if there is, in this particular case, a historical building that needs to have some work done, that if it is going to be sole sourced, it will be written why it is sole sourced, or that it will be competitively bid based on whatever it is? Because that's a policy, that's something in place. I'm not real estate, I'm not facilities, but what I do know, what I do understand is following laws, following procedures.
Thank you very much. Great question, Delegate. Yes, absolutely. DGS has never had a policy director. DGS has never had a director of performance improvement and innovation. New roles we've been developing here under this administration and hiring for that exact reason, to make sure we've got those methodologies in place, make sure we are doing continual process improvement, updating our workflows and business processes, and making sure we've got the standard operating procedures in place and documentation. I really want to say that DGS employees are hardworking, dedicated employees. I often tell them very oftenly that we are essentially the unsung heroes behind state government. We make state government operate and run. A lot of other agencies get a lot of credit, but we make things happen behind the scenes for them, whether it's procurement or facilities or real estate. We help support state government. And in that, I will say that there's always, and to your question, another delegate's question, there's always room for continuous improvement across the board. Times change. The way things done, there's always room for improvement with each employee and at the organization level within your respective unit. And I think we're certainly doing that, working towards that to make sure we do that. It is our goal to make sure that we are in compliance with all these OLA findings and work through them very closely, but also make sure that we are functioning in a manner that has these standard methodologies in place, not just here for us, currently our employees, but for the future as well.
Thank you. Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to just clarify some points about the prior administration. I think one, I'm looking at the audit report itself, and it points out in finding number 4, DGS could not could not support numerous aspects of the MDE lease renewal. MDE's prior lease ended in December 22. In January of 2024, DGS renewed MDE's lease at a total cost of $167 million. January of 2024 is under this current administration. So, number one, like, there were decisions made that are referenced in this audit report that are under this current administration, and number two, the decision to build the renovation costs into the lease itself, I believe, is also a decision that was made under this administration, not under the prior one. So how do you square that round peg into this hole?
Thank you, Senator. I'll answer a second question first. The methodology to amortize over the lease term the design and construction costs has been in place at DGS for many, many years. So that predates this administration. It's actually a very good industry best practice, and it allows the state to negotiate a very comprehensive and aggressive lease rate at market rate or below, with the landlord being responsible for all the upfront capital costs. So I think that's a really good thing. And your first question again, Senator, was?
The first part of that was, if you look at the audit report itself, it references the fact that DGS renewed MDE's lease in January 2024. That's under this current administration.
Yes, absolutely. So to give a little bit of context here for the committee members, the prior lease expired in December of 2022 under the prior administration. So it was left to this administration to make a decision regarding the MDE site. So we were in a holdover period for a period of about a year, from January of 23 through January of 24, at which point DGS was working very closely with Maryland Department of Environment on options and opportunities. And I hit some of those in my initial talking points, but I'll reiterate some of those. It was, whether to relocate or to renew the current existing lease. And ultimately, the decision based on the negotiations was to renew the lease, which would be in the best interest of the state. That was a projected savings of about $71 million versus moving to commercial lease space. A lot of added benefits there, Senator, of green sustainability we talked about, free parking for all 1,000 employees plus their emergency vehicles. They have a lot of equipment, laboratory equipment as well. It would be very expensive to relocate MDE to a new location, and they would not have free parking for all employees at any new location we were to identify.
But I think
for them.
what OLA is contending is that they could not find a lot of the documentation to back up a lot of those decisions. And while you pointed out earlier that this documentation, I guess, was provided to OLA back in June of this year, in looking at Mr. Tannen's reaction behind you, that misalignment seems like he doesn't believe that they received that documentation. And he's nodding. And so, I'm not sure where the misalignment is, but clearly there's, some inaccuracy here in terms of what documentation has been sent to OLA and what OLA believes they've actually received. On the point of DGS is the control agency here, right? So MDE, for example, in this lease, is the client of DGS. And you, as the control agency, are negotiating between the developer, the owner, the landlord, and the agency that's involved. As a control agency, you decide what you're supposed to be there to call balls and strikes in terms of what is approved, what you should seek as a state for this agency to be negotiated with the developer. When we hear about things in the press about, for example, locations being moved within the MDE space so that the Secretary's office could be closer to the elevator, which I believe was reported by Maryland Matters, and we hear from the department, when we hear folks in the department have low morale and concerns there, and I think people are, employees of the department are feeling very downtrodden. And they hear of this kind of news that the Secretary's office is being moved so it's closer to an elevator. Why did DGS not exercise its role as a control agency to push back on that and say that it's not necessary? And I think you may say that, like, we don't move elevator shafts to meet the Secretary's office, but my understanding is that this was moved, that the entire suite of offices in that building were moved to an unoccupied part of the building, which then happened to be closer to that elevator. So, in terms of reviewing those kinds of requests from agencies and departments, agencies and departments can ask for a lot of different things. It's your job to call balls and strikes. Why in this instance did you approve that move? that part of that move?
Great question, Senator. Thank you for that question. I will say that the renovation of the MDE space is part of this current lease negotiation, and that was taken a little out of context, and I'll get back to that. But the justification part of that was for the interior renovations of the space. And the reason is MDE had outgrown their current existing space, and there was different units shuffled on different floors. They were not consolidated together. Another important part there is Maryland Energy Administration was also embedded within the MDE space. They had also grown significantly over time and were also spread on multiple floors. Part of this renovation project was to consolidate units within MDE to be consolidated into one region, one location, so they can have better collaboration. It was also to consolidate MEA, Maryland Energy Administration, to one location as well. And that was part of the efforts there to redesign the space to meet their needs over the next 20 years. It's important to note as well that their space now just happens to be closer to an elevator for the executive suite, Senator, but it's also important to know that we are resizing space to make it more suitable for modern office space standards. That includes decreasing the size of the secretary's office. Her executive team, all of their offices are getting smaller. They're oversized. They should not be that large. We're also looking at cubicles, removing certain cubicles, decreasing the space of certain cubicles to set up hoteling space and collaboration space where individuals can come, drop a laptop and cell phone and work for the day, and then go home and come back in a different space for the next day. So we are using our new updated space standards associated with this renovation as well. So it is a comprehensive look at space planning for the agency and consolidation as well as renovation of their interior space.
So, my understanding from folks in the department is that morale is low there, and this is certainly not going to help, and that the reporting that was done by Maryland Matters on this move, I think shines light on the fact that a lot of these requests come forward. They don't necessarily need to be approved, but I think they should be taken a close look at by the control agency, by DGS. And this is really just kind of the first step of many other leases that are going to be engaged by the department for other departments that are also moving. And so I think things like this need to be better scrutinized. I guess my last point here then is on the capital budget request, and that it was clear that when requests were made for additional capital dollars for renovations and such, that was not granted by the General Assembly. And so by building the renovation dollars, the renovation costs, by building the renovation costs into the lease, it seems like a way of circumventing our capital budget procurement process. And that would seem to be counter to the intent of the General Assembly, that we're not providing these capital dollars, and so it seems like this is a workaround on the part of the department and the agencies that are your clients to be able to get the renovations that they want without having to go through the regular capital procurement process.
Senator, are you referring to any particular capital budget request that was submitted and denied?
I think there were requests that were put forward for renovations to specific departments, and those were not approved in our capital budget, right? And so in order to have some of these renovations done, one way to work around this seems to be to build it into the cost of the lease.
So, Senator, I would say that this is actually industry best practices, and this is a very good way to aggressively negotiate lease rates. So we are able to pay fair market rates for leases or below fair market rates and allow the landlord to spend the money to build out the space to our exact specifications. And the reasons there, Senator, is every building is building specific. And what I mean by that is there are certain buildings that might need to be completely gutted and then completely renovated to our exact specifications. There are others that might not necessarily need to be. Cubicles or offices could be repurposed, as an example, for reuse by state agencies. It is very building specific. So that's why the agency takes a very concerted approach to having a detailed space plan in addition to having DGS space standards to meet those requirements. So I would absolutely, I'm sorry.
I should clarify. It's not that you didn't ask for the money and didn't receive it. Sorry, it's not that you didn't receive the funding in the capital budget. It's that you didn't ask for the funding in the capital budget, right? So instead of coming to the General Assembly and to our budget committees to ask for that funding for the renovation, by building it into the cost of the lease, it's a workaround to move it from what should have been a capital budget request into the operating budget.
So I would disagree there, Senator. I don't think it's a workaround. Capital budgeting process, which I've been very familiar with, been involved in it for many, many years, takes time. Number one, and there's significant process associated with that. In addition to that, typically we do not do capital projects in non-state-owned facilities. So that is a challenge in and of itself right there, to secure capital funding to do major capital projects within a landlord's existing space. To my understanding, that typically does not happen at all at the state government level. And I believe that's one of the other additional reasons why we coordinate with landlords to have them utilize their funding to renovate the space to our specifications.
Well, with all due respect, it seems like a workaround to me. I think in your reply, in the department's reply to OLA, it says that MD did not have the capital funds for those renovations. And so this does seem like a workaround to be able to get the funding that the department, in this instance MDE, would like to have to be able to do those renovations by, instead of going through our capital budget procurement process with our budget committees, to build this into the cost to the lease and basically amortize that renovation through the 20 years.
Senator, I respectfully disagree. I think that comment was taken a little bit out of context. That was additional comment that I believe the agency provided, just reiterating the fact that.
I'm sorry, I think we lost your sound.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So yeah, Senator, I would respectfully disagree. I think that comment was taken a little bit out of context. That was related to reiterating the fact that in addition to negotiating a good rate, there also was no capital budget that was available to do something like purchase new cubicles, as an example, or perform the build. That I think that was additional explanation or justification, taken a little bit out of context there. There was no capital request that was put in place for this. I absolutely do not think that it is circumventing the capital budget. I think we are using industry best practice standards for negotiating lease rates to be the best interest of the state. Otherwise, we would still be paying a significant rate for lease space and then coming up with capital dollars to do the construction. It's always challenging doing construction in somebody else's building. Lots of things that could go wrong. For an example, we might be taking over a couple of floors in a building, not necessarily the entire building. How do we renovate or provide new HVAC mechanical systems to that space, right? We would not want to install all new HVAC mechanical systems for the entire building. Very similarly, elevators or escalators or something of that nature that serves the entire building, right? It's very challenging being in an existing lease space in a private building to do a capital project. That's why it's not done. So I would absolutely disagree that it is circumventing the budgetary process. This process has been set up and structured in this manner for many, many years for a lot of these reasons I've outlined here.
Thank you. Delegate Polakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we're running out of time, so these will be very short questions. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned in your opening remarks some forward-looking initiatives, and I just wanted to drill down on that. One, could you provide what the timeline is for the facility master plan completion? And then second, you mentioned that there's a new compliance officer who's been on the job for about 6 months. Are they just focused on these audit findings, or what other what else is in their job description, basically?
A great question. Thank you, Delegate. We are about to start ramping up this master plan now, bringing a consultant on board to assist us. We are hoping for the initial analysis and findings to be done within a year. Doesn't necessarily mean we'll have additional findings that will be forthcoming associated with that, but this is something that we would like to happen continually, meaning we do a master plan once that is continually updated over time. Part of this analysis is working very closely with our partner agencies, our sister agencies in this regard. This is going to cover all the state hospitals, all the correctional facilities, juvenile detention facilities. All state facilities will be included in this analysis. So we'll be working very closely with our partners, and I am hoping this analysis and the continuation of it will outlive us all and be a normal part of state budgeting process going forward. Our chief compliance officer, it's a great question, has been initiated in this. Unfortunately, she started right in the middle of an audit, and actually in the middle of 2 audits. OSP is under audit as well, but absolutely will be working towards better transparency and compliance for the entire agency. Not just following up on existing audits and prior audits, but also with all compliance-related issues, making sure we are following all laws, rules, and regulations in all the work that we perform, as an example. So anything that we're doing would be vetted through, especially as we continue to build out our standard operating procedures and other methodologies, make sure that we're following the right rules and regulations.
Thank you, Delegate Plotchfitchkar. Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to make one comment about Senator Lamb's questioning. So the response that DGS gave in the audit specifically said the agency did not have a capital improvement budget available to support this expense. Didn't say anything about leasing, not being able to provide capital expenses in the leasing. And then obviously there was some lack of clarity within the documents given to the BPW. So I think maybe we just need to make sure that that's clarified going forward. I did have another question that I didn't get a chance to ask earlier about the MDH lease, and maybe you can shed some light on this. So I'm looking back at this is a press release that you all put out after BPW approval of a modified capital lease for the parking structure with 300 Green, 300, 400 North Green Street with the MDH move. So it said in here, due to changing market conditions, a new financing model was pursued. Now Medco is going to own the parking structure. Is that factored into the analysis that you've given to us, the now costs for Medco and state ownership? And given that we were shifting the capital model for the parking garage, was that an opportunity for your agency to then relook at, provide a new analysis on the entirety of the capital deal for the headquarters and the building and the parking structure? And if so, was that done?
So great question, Mr. Chairman. I will say, we're happy to provide additional information and cost-benefit analyses that were conducted. That is outside of the audit period. That press release tied in with additional renegotiations DGS was able to perform regarding a capital lease structure, coordination with Medco and the landlord there. So that actually was...
Were you able to do any renegotiation on the other deal or look at, again, you told us that analysis was not done in 2002, or in 22, and I appreciate Delegate Aronson and Delegate Harrison's comments, because you're right, they're right. We want to make sure this is fixed going forward. So you reevaluated the capital structure for the parking garage, which you indicated in here was a primary reason why that building was available. It's hard to find 1,100 free parking spaces within Baltimore City. So no reevaluation was done, again, of an apples-to-apples comparison of purchasing and renovating another building at the time that you reevaluated the capital deal for the parking structure that was part of that overall lease in 2021.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, what I was referring to, we did a cost-benefit analysis and update to the entire structure. So the entire lease structure, including space, was renegotiated as part of that capital lease transaction. So it was a space included, as well as the addition of a parking garage as well. So that cost savings we projected to be an additional savings of $80 million over a 25-year span.
But you just told me earlier that you didn't do the building purchase and renovation analysis.
Not at the time for this particular lease. So we were focusing primarily on the analysis that was done regarding the MDH lease.
So you did another analysis in 2025 that you just haven't shared with us yet?
There were subsequent ones that were done related to the capital lease structure that we have not yet we've not shared with the committee.
All right, let me ask you a point blank question, because I asked you this earlier and apparently I needed to clarify. So I asked you if you had done that analysis, and your assistant secretary told me no, back when the 2021 lease was signed. So when you had an opportunity to reevaluate the entirety of the capital agreement and actually, I'm glad you clarified, because this press release is not clear whether it was just for the construction of the parking building or whether it was the parking structure and the building itself. So in, I guess, either the end of 2024 or at some point earlier this year in 2025, when you reevaluated the entire capital deal, did you do, again, an apples-to-apples comparison between the building lease option under current market terms and market conditions with a building purchase and renovation option under current market conditions before you reevaluated and created this new structure with Medco?
Senator, I'll let Wendy Scott Neighbor chime in on it to give some more details of it.
So we will step back and look at that cost-benefit analysis, but we did a new cost-benefit analysis when we were looking at converting to a capital lease, and
Right,
that's your question.
But this is a simple question,
You wanted
because
to know-
you told me you did not do one. At this point, you said back in 2021, there wasn't necessarily the real estate available to purchase. We are now, fast forward 3 to 4 years, when you are reevaluating the entire deal to purchase this property, or to lease this property. I'm asking if you did another evaluation where you said, let us look at the current real estate market. Could we have found a building to purchase that would have given the state the building and allowed us to pursue the renovation under state ownership versus the building lease and the $220 million plus or minus, and probably more now because Medco actually owns that facility now, $220 million capital expense that's built into the lease only for 15 years with MDH, with that building?
We did not step back and look at acquiring and renovating a building, if that's your question.
So the answer would be no, that you did not do an apples to apples cost comparison, even though you have sat here and told us. And again, I think this goes to the point of my colleagues, and this is a bipartisan concern. This is not Republican versus Democrat. I think our concern is that things are being done differently now, and what you're telling me is they weren't. And so I think the primary concern of this committee is making sure that we've learned from mistakes, that things are going to be done differently. So I think that's concerning, that as we reevaluated the largest lease and move out of State Center, you're telling me we didn't do an apples to apples comparison when we had an opportunity to.
Could I add context, sir? When we re-looked at the MDH lease, it was through the lens of we had an existing lease in place, and to terminate that lease, there would have been termination costs. So we did a very deep analysis. What would it look like if we walked away from that lease, and what were the other options available to us? So,
Which included, Mr. Chairman, which included going to other locations as well. That looked at that terminating that lease and going to other locations as well. So we did look at that opportunity as well.
But again, with all due respect, it did not include the building purchase and renovation, which is the most identical cost to cost comparison of what we've done. I know we're running over time here, so I guess the last question that I would have for you all just on this is, I think as my co-chair mentioned, the committee would like to see all of the cost-benefit analyses, and particularly, I think what is really important, and we had talked about this in our conversation prior to the hearing, MSDE, the move out of the Grasmick building, I think is probably the most salient current example that is not, kind of clouded under the State Center move and the broader State Center issue. It's a separate building, it's a separate real estate acquisition process. I think the committee would want to see the cost-benefit analysis that has been done, because that is currently under the process. So we can't point fingers at the previous administration. That is under this new process, under the work that this administration is doing, we will get a chance to see what is the true cost-benefit analysis. We will, want to make sure that we're looking at that. The last question that I have is just shifting gears a little bit from topics in the audit, but I'd be remiss if I didn't get a chance to ask this. I know this is a huge priority for the speaker, particularly around, and I know the General Assembly in general, the Office of Social and Economic Mobility. So obviously, that is now in the process of being set up. I think the importance of that is probably even more heightened under some of the federal conditions that we're dealing with. So can you just give me an update on the status of getting the office space for that agency and where we are in that process?
Did you want? Go ahead.
Yes, sir. We are working closely with the agency. We met with them a few months ago to talk through their space needs. I understand they're temporarily housed at 100 Community Place, but we are working very closely with them. We anticipate releasing an RFP to seek new space for them this fall.
Do you know what the timeline would be overall from them actually getting into a new space, or is it going to depend on the RFP?
We typically estimate approximately 2 years.
Okay, so then we'd be looking at about 2.5 years potentially.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I also want to, while purchasing and renovating has been sort of a hot button topic for today, I did want to reiterate that invariably purchasing and renovating a building will absolutely cost more than it will be to lease commercial lease space. And that's something that it's more common knowledge, and we're making sure we're doing cost-benefit analysis to sort of reflect that. But on a policy decision as well, in a place like Baltimore City, that's taking a commercial building off the city's tax rolls as well. Once the state owns it, we will no longer be paying taxes to the city. Something just to, that's something just to be cognizant of as well as part of the analysis when we purchase a private commercial building and take it off the city's tax rolls.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Clearly, we did purchase a building, though, because Medco now owns the parking garage. So I just want to point that out.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to do a correction as well. During our analysis for the Medco, we did, in fact, look at purchasing and renovating a building. That was absolutely part of our analysis. We're happy to share the analysis with the committee, so you've got it. But there was numerous options that were looked at when it comes to the Medco transaction. Absolutely, including purchasing and renovating. Our ultimate decision to move forward with a capital lease structure is projected to save the state $80 million over a 25-year span with the addition of a new parking garage there.
All right, well, then I guess I'm confused because we keep going back and forth. So I think the place that I will leave this at, I've heard we didn't do it, we did do it, we didn't do it, we did do it. If you could produce all of those documents for us, again, on the MSDE property, because I think that will allay some fears, allow us to see what the process is now going forward. I think the committee would like to see all of the MDH documentation, and then again, as we've asked for, the cost-benefit analyses for all of the moves, that we can clarify some of the maybe misalignment between OLA and your team as well. And I'm going to turn it back over to my co-chair.
So I'm, I think, ready to wrap up, but wanted to give Senator Benson, who has her microphone pressed. Did you want to ask something, Senator?
I just want to thank you all very much for your presentation. But you just hit upon something that really is so important, not only to me, but to the people who are seated here, these elected officials. Homelessness is a crucial problem here in this great state of Maryland. The question I want to ask of you is, do you all have the plan, the process, and how do we utilize the plan so that we can begin to work with the number of people that we hear from almost on a daily basis relative to hunger, homelessness, of course the list goes on, but homelessness is a very, very serious problem, and it's so unacceptable. Do you all have the plan? I know that the governor just issued an order, but I really want to be clear on the processes in place. What is the plan?
Senator, thank you very much for that question. So that may be more appropriate for Department of Housing and Community Development. I will say that there is a new law that was passed recently in the past couple of years that does require DGS, when it comes to the surplusing of property, to evaluate that property by DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, for the potential use of affordable housing. So we are going through that methodology right now in collaboration with the HCD and Maryland Department of Planning to evaluate and review state surplus property for the potential for it to be utilized and repurposed for affordable housing.
You're working with, in Prince George's County, you're working with the housing and community development. They have the plan and the process.
State Department of Housing and Community Development. We work with DHCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, on any state surplus property.
The State Department of Housing.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the conclusion of the hearing. Appreciate DGS, appreciate OLA, and appreciate my colleagues and co-chair. Thank you very much.